Nigeria's petroleum sector is experiencing a major shift following reports that Aliko Dangote Refinery is now responsible for supplying about 92% of the petrol consumed in the country. This development comes as the federal government of Nigeria significantly reduces fuel importation, marking what many analysts describe as a historic turning point in the nation's long-struggling energy sector. For decades, Nigeria has been one of the world's largest crude oil producers, yet it has relied heavily on importing refined petroleum products such as petrol, diesel, and aviation fuel. This paradox has often been blamed on the poor performance of state-owned refineries managed by the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPC. These refineries, including the Port Harcourt Refinery, Warri Refinery, and Kaduna Refinery, have struggled with years of neglect, mismanagement, and technical failures, forcing the country to spend billions of dollars annually on fuel imports. The situation began to change with the construction of the massive Dangote Refinery, located in the Lekki Free Trade Zone in Lagos. Built by Africa's richest businessman, Aliko Dangote, the refinery was designed to process about 650,000 barrels of crude oil per day, making it the largest single-train refinery in the world. After years of construction delays and enormous financial investment, the refinery finally began operations, gradually increasing its refining capacity and releasing refined petroleum products into the Nigerian market. As production expanded, the refinery started supplying large volumes of premium motor spirit, PMS, commonly known as petrol. With local production increasing, the federal government of Nigeria began reducing its reliance on imported petrol. Industry reports indicate that the country has now paused most fuel importation activities, allowing locally refined petrol to dominate the market. This shift has had a dramatic impact on the fuel supply chain across the country. With imports slowing down, the Dangote Refinery has become the primary source of petrol available for distribution nationwide. According to recent figures circulating within the oil and gas industry, the refinery is now responsible for supplying approximately 92% of the petrol consumed across Nigeria. Experts say the development could reshape the country's energy landscape. For many years, Nigeria spent huge amounts of foreign exchange importing petrol from Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world. These imports placed heavy pressure on the nation's foreign reserves and contributed to economic instability, especially during periods of high global fuel prices. By refining petrol locally, Nigeria may significantly reduce the amount of foreign currency needed to sustain its energy needs. The rise of the Dangote Refinery also represents a major victory for private sector investment in Africa's largest economy. The project, which reportedly cost more than $19 billion to complete, is one of the biggest industrial investments ever made on the African continent. Its success demonstrates the potential for large-scale private infrastructure projects to solve long-standing national problems. However, while the refinery's growing dominance is being celebrated by many, it has also sparked debates among economists and industry observers. Some analysts warn that allowing a single refinery to control such a large share of the country's petrol supply could create a form of market monopoly. They argue that without competition from other refineries, pricing power could become concentrated in the hands of one producer. Supporters of the refinery, on the other hand, insist that the development is a necessary step toward energy independence. They argue that Nigeria's decades-long dependence on imported petrol was unsustainable and costly. By producing fuel locally, the country can stabilize supply, reduce shipping costs, and create thousands of jobs within the petroleum industry. There are also expectations that other refineries in Nigeria will eventually come back online, helping to balance the market. The Port Harcourt, Warri, and Kaduna refineries have all undergone various rehabilitation efforts by the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, although many Nigerians remain skeptical about when these facilities will operate at full capacity again. Meanwhile, fuel marketers and distributors across the country are already adjusting to the new supply structure. Many are now sourcing petrol directly from the Dangote Refinery instead of importing it through coastal depots. This change is expected to reshape distribution logistics, transportation costs, and pricing structures within the downstream petroleum sector. For ordinary Nigerians, the most important question remains whether this new development will lead to lower petrol prices. While some experts believe local refining could eventually reduce costs, others caution that global crude oil prices, exchange rates, and government policies will still play major roles in determining the final price consumers pay at the pump. As the Dangote Refinery continues to scale up its operations, The coming months will reveal whether Nigeria's long-awaited dream of fuel self-sufficiency can finally become a reality. What is clear, however, is that the refinery has already begun to redefine the country's petroleum industry, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Nigeria's economic history. For many years, Nigeria's dependence on imported petrol remained one of the most puzzling contradictions in the global energy industry. Despite being one of the largest crude oil producers in Africa, the country struggled to refine enough fuel locally to meet its domestic demand. As a result, billions of dollars were spent annually importing petrol from foreign refineries. This long-standing challenge eventually led to the creation of one of the most ambitious industrial projects in Africa, the Dangote Refinery. The refinery was developed by Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote, widely recognized as the richest man in Africa and the founder of the Dangote Group. Known for his investments in cement, sugar, and other major industries, Dangote decided to enter the petroleum sector with a project that many initially considered too massive and complex to succeed. Located in the Lekki Free Trade Zone in Lagos, the refinery was designed to process about 650,000 barrels of crude oil per day. This capacity makes it the largest single-train refinery in the world and one of the biggest refining facilities globally. The scale of the project reflects the enormous demand for fuel within Nigeria, a country with more than 200 million people and millions of vehicles that rely on petrol daily. Construction of the refinery began in the mid-2010s and required enormous financial resources. Estimates suggest that the total cost of the project exceeded $19 billion, making it one of the most expensive private sector investments in Africa's history. The project included not only the refinery itself but also a deep-sea port, pipelines, storage facilities, and petrochemical plants designed to produce a wide range of products. Building such a massive facility came with numerous challenges. Delays in equipment delivery, technical adjustments, and the complex logistics of constructing an industrial plant of this scale slowed progress several times. However, despite these setbacks, work continued, and the refinery eventually reached operational stages. When the refinery finally began producing refined petroleum products, it immediately attracted national attention. Nigerians had long hoped that local refining would reduce the country's dependence on imported petrol and help stabilize the energy sector. Gradually, the refinery began releasing diesel, aviation fuel, and eventually petrol into the domestic market. At the same time, the federal government of Nigeria and the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPC, were facing increasing pressure to reduce the country's costly reliance on fuel imports. Importing petrol required large amounts of foreign currency, which placed heavy pressure on Nigeria's foreign exchange reserves. The system also exposed the country to international supply disruptions and fluctuating global prices. As production from the Dangote refinery increased, the government began encouraging local supply as an alternative to imports. Fuel marketers who previously relied on imported petrol started sourcing products directly from the refinery. Over time, this gradual transition began reshaping Nigeria's downstream petroleum market. Reports within the energy industry suggest that petrol imports have now significantly declined as the refinery continues to scale up its operations. With more locally refined petrol entering the market, the refinery's role in the country's fuel supply has expanded dramatically. Industry insiders indicate that the Dangote refinery may now account for as much as 92% of the petrol distributed across Nigeria. While official figures continue to evolve, the growing influence of the refinery is widely acknowledged by analysts and policymakers. This shift represents a major milestone for Nigeria's quest for energy independence. For decades, the country's inability to refine its own crude oil efficiently was considered a major economic weakness. By producing fuel locally, Nigeria can potentially save billions of dollars that would otherwise be spent on imports. The refinery is also expected to strengthen Nigeria's position within the regional energy market. Many neighboring African countries lack large-scale refining facilities and rely heavily on imported fuel. With its massive capacity, the Dangote refinery could export refined products across West Africa and beyond, transforming Nigeria into a key supplier of petroleum products within the region. In addition to economic benefits, the refinery has created thousands of jobs for engineers, technicians, construction workers, and logistics professionals. It has also stimulated the development of new infrastructure in the Lekki area, including roads, housing, and industrial support services. Despite the optimism surrounding the project, some challenges remain. The refinery must maintain consistent production levels to meet the country's enormous demand for petrol. Distribution networks must also operate efficiently to ensure fuel reaches all parts of the country. Meanwhile, efforts to rehabilitate government-owned refineries such as the Port Harcourt Refinery, Warri Refinery, and Kaduna Refinery are still ongoing under the supervision of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. If these facilities eventually return to full operation, they could complement the Dangote Refinery and strengthen Nigeria's overall refining capacity. As the country continues its transition away from heavy petrol importation, the Dangote Refinery remains at the center of this historic transformation. Its success could determine whether Nigeria finally overcomes decades of challenges in its petroleum industry and achieves true energy self-sufficiency. The emergence of the Dangote Refinery as the dominant supplier of petrol in Nigeria has triggered intense discussions across the country, with reports suggesting that the refinery now provides about 92% of the nation's petrol supply. Many Nigerians are beginning to wonder how this development will affect fuel prices, economic stability, and the future of the petroleum industry. For decades, Nigeria depended heavily on imported petrol despite being one of Africa's largest crude oil producers. This situation created a long-standing economic contradiction that many experts described as unsustainable. Large volumes of crude oil were exported overseas, refined in foreign countries, and then shipped back to Nigeria as finished petroleum products. This system cost the country billions of dollars each year and placed enormous pressure on foreign exchange reserves. However, the rise of the Dangote Refinery, built by Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote, has started to change that narrative. The refinery, located in the Lekki Free Trade Zone in Lagos, has the capacity to process about 650,000 barrels of crude oil per day. This enormous capacity means it can produce enough petrol, diesel, aviation fuel, and other refined products to meet Nigeria's domestic demand and even export to other African countries. With the federal government of Nigeria reportedly reducing or pausing petrol imports, locally refined fuel has become the primary source of supply across the country. Many fuel marketers now purchase petrol directly from the Dangote Refinery instead of relying on shipments arriving through Nigerian ports. This shift represents one of the biggest structural changes the Nigerian downstream oil sector has seen in decades. For everyday Nigerians, the biggest expectation from this development is lower fuel prices. Petrol prices affect almost every aspect of life in the country, from transportation costs to food prices and electricity generation. When petrol becomes expensive, the cost of living typically rises as businesses transfer higher operating costs to consumers. Some analysts believe that local refining could help stabilize fuel prices over time. By eliminating the need for international shipping, insurance fees, and complex import logistics, locally refined petrol could potentially become cheaper than imported products. In addition, producing fuel within Nigeria may reduce the pressure on the country's foreign exchange market, since fewer dollars will be required to import petroleum products. However, experts caution that the situation is more complex than it appears. Even though petrol is now being refined locally, the crude oil used in the refining process is still priced according to global market rates. This means international oil prices will continue to influence the final price of petrol in Nigeria. Exchange rate fluctuations may also play a role in determining the cost of refined products. Another issue that has sparked debate is the possibility of market dominance. With the Dangote Refinery supplying a large portion of Nigeria's petrol, some economists have raised concerns about the lack of competition within the market. They argue that a healthy petroleum sector should include multiple refineries operating simultaneously to prevent any single company from having excessive control over fuel supply. Supporters of the refinery, however, argue that the project should be seen as a major national achievement. The refinery represents one of the largest private industrial investments in Africa and has already created thousands of jobs. Beyond direct employment, it has also stimulated growth in related industries such as transportation, logistics, storage, and petrochemicals. The project is also expected to transform Nigeria into a regional hub for refined petroleum products. Instead of importing fuel, Nigeria could soon become a major exporter to other African countries that lack large refining capacity. This could strengthen the country's position within the African energy market and generate additional revenue for the economy. Meanwhile, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPC, continues efforts to rehabilitate government-owned refineries such as the Port Harcourt Refinery, Warri Refinery, and Kaduna Refinery. If these facilities eventually operate at full capacity, they could introduce more competition into the market and strengthen Nigeria's overall refining capacity. For now, the Dangote Refinery stands at the center of Nigeria's petroleum transformation. Its influence on the nation's fuel supply is undeniable, and its operations will likely shape the direction of the energy sector for many years to come. As Nigerians watch these developments unfold, many hope the new era of local refining will finally bring stability to the country's fuel market. While challenges remain, the shift away from heavy petrol importation represents a significant step toward energy independence. Whether this new system will deliver affordable fuel and long-term economic benefits remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the emergence of the Dangote Refinery has already begun to rewrite the story of Nigeria's petroleum industry, ushering in a new chapter that could redefine the country's economic future.